org design becomes more and more important as you bring in new team members to really ensure everyone knows how everything fits together. What are the key mistakes that you've seen founders make at the early stage with org design?
I think it's inevitable that you won't get org design right all of the time. If you're getting it right 80% of the time, you're probably doing a lot better than most. I think reflecting on my own journey, there are a few mistakes that I've made, sometimes more than once, if I'm being honest, that are easy traps that founders can fall into. So just to highlight a few of them, one of them is hiring too senior too early and being seduced by the perception or the promise of experience. I really think in the early stages of a startup's life, I think you need people who operate like Swiss Army knives. So they're highly versatile. They have a variety of tools that they can leverage to really figure things out. And that type of individual is often very in their skill set, but not particularly deep. Whereas actually quite experienced or senior leaders, by comparison, they tend to be very deep, functional experts, but often not that broad. So to me, it's a little bit of a trade-off between breadth and depth. And I do think this really starts to change and evolve as the company's requirements for the trade-off between that breadth and depth of skill sets starts to change as well. I think the second mistake, which I think is a very human mistake to make, is really holding on to people for too long out of loyalty or because you like the person. I think this is particularly hard for early stage founders. You have such a committed group of individuals in the early stages who are often working beyond reasonable hours, who are typically taking a pay cut to go on this journey with you. And so there's that's a very kind of bonding experience. But I've also realized that the organization's needs do change significantly, and particularly every sort of 2 to 3 years of the company's life cycle. Actually, if you realize as a founder, there's been someone who's been part of your organization for the last couple of years and they've been fantastic in that context and they're not right to scale with you, then it's really the kind thing to let them go as soon as you become aware of that fact. And so I think this is where you start to challenge sometimes the emotional connections that people build in the early days. But I fundamentally think it doesn't serve the individual, nor does it serve the organization to hold on to people for too long once you realize they're probably not the right profile to support you and the company with the next stage of its evolution. And then I guess the third sort of really challenge I think that I've seen myself a number of times on over the last few years, 10 years really, is what I think of as the right role, right person conundrum. So often when you're hiring for a totally new role, so say your first HR person or your first data scientist, you have the challenge of needing to get two things right at the same time. You're needing to scope out and define really specifically the right role for your organization at that point in its evolution, but you're also then having to you're challenged with the task of finding the right person for the role. And I think this is a real double whammy because you're having to do two things at once, both of which are new to you. And certainly, I think what can often happen in these situations is if that person or that role doesn't start to manifest the impact that you're expecting, I think it's very hard to figure out if actually you got the wrong scoping for that role. You're perhaps looking for, you scoped out a role that was someone who was perhaps a little bit more managerial, whereas you need someone who's more hands-on. Hard to figure out if actually it's the role definition that's the wrong thing or if it's the individual. So I think those are a collection of different kind of maybe pitfalls that I've often seen. I've certainly fallen into myself, but I often see are easy traps for early stage founders.